the loser of the week. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the podcast. Yes, 2008 or 2018 podcast, I should say. This will be the week 3 recap and week 4 preview. And as you guys have watched the pod the last few times, obviously we're gonna talk about some of the more marquee games from last week. Give out some winners and losers from the week, talk about some of our bets that went right and went wrong, and then same thing for the upcoming week. Some bets, perhaps, maybe some lines we're looking at. It's Sunday night, so we're probably there's not going to be a lot of bets that we really dug into quite yet, but as always, check in the video description throughout the week, and I'll be adding the bets for all of us throughout the week. So, so I guess we can get right into recapping last week, and let me actually get David from New Orleans on the phone. So he's going to give us a little his perspective of the LSU Auburn game, and then a little bit of the OSU TCU game. But Addison, if you want to start, and then we'll just have
on LSU Auburn.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Maybe he'll just cut us off.
Anyway, yeah, LSU Auburn.
Hey, what's up, man? So we basically just started the pod, and we were gonna jump right into the LSU and Auburn game. So I guess I was gonna let Addison just go since he was kind of mid-sentence, and then I'll let you kind of jump in from there if you're ready. But so Addison, go ahead and what you thought about that game.
Kind of went the way I thought it would go. Just a defensive game, close throughout pretty much. Joe Burrow, first big road test for him, and his stats weren't great. I mean, for the whole season, they haven't really been great. He's been completing less than 50% of his passes, but he also takes a lot of shots down the field, and sometimes it works out for him. So I think that's something they've been trying, and probably why they ended up starting him. They want to be able to stretch the field a little bit, open up some more things for their offense. But their defense, is really good as usual for LSU. And at the end of the game, when they needed Burrow to make plays, he came up clutch for them, and they ended up winning it on the last play with a field goal.
Yeah. So again, guys, this is David from New Orleans with us tonight, and David, it's weird saying that. If you wanna go ahead and give your kind of like what you thought about that game, anything that you saw differently from Addison, or anything you want to add, essentially.
Well, everyone in New Orleans was super excited this morning.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
We were all out tailgating for the Saints-Browns game, and everybody wanted to talk about Joe Burrow.
Yeah.
Ja Burrow.
Ja Burrow.
Go Tigers. No. So I mean, but they said the same thing that Addison just said, is that he's completing less than 50% of his passes, but he makes plays when he needs to, and I think that's something that LSU has been lacking for the last several years, just like getting an explosive play here and there.
Yeah, exactly. They when he hits like a deep throw, I mean, he threw for 250 yards on only 15 completions, So it's like a lot of big play potential there. It's not going to work out a lot of the time, but when they do hit one, it's kind of big for them.
I think their offense is kind of like the passing concepts are a lot like old college and NFL, like almost like, I don't want to say like run and shoot, but it kind of is what is going on there. Like there's a lot of quarterbacks back in the day, like 80s, I would say around there, where before the West Coast concepts and like the spread concept started coming to fruition, a lot of these quarterbacks would only complete like in the mid 50%, but that's because they were taking tons of shots down the field.
Yeah.
And so Burrow, he's likely missed some throws, but they've taken, like, the two games that I've watched them, the Miami game and then, yesterday's game against Auburn, I mean, a lot of his passes are down the field. Like, I don't expect him to be completing in the 60% range if that's how it's going to be. So they're kind of like the anti, new aged offense. Like they're very much more vertical. So, but they just kind of looking at their schedule now here, like I see potential for them to get to the Georgia game on the 13th undefeated.
Yeah, things look a lot better. Before the season, we were wondering if they were going to have like 3 losses by then, and now, we're saying.
Oh yeah, by then, yeah. I thought you meant all year. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not sold on them yet.
Right.
I actually think that Burrow's playing really well, but what they're going to run into with that schedule's coming up, he does not have the skill players around him that LSU's had in the past, and that he had around when he was at Ohio State.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's gonna get exposed when they get into the tougher SEC competition, and because their offense, they can go a whole quarter without scoring. Well, when they run into Georgia, Alabama, those explosive offenses, they can get down real fast, and I think it could be tough to come back from.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think you nailed it on the head pretty good. Like I think that Auburn is certainly good. I don't take anything away from them, but the one thing I will say about Auburn, which after I dug into the Auburn-Washington after that, like I actually thought Washington outplayed them, and the one thing that, even though I don't like Gary Danielson, he nailed it pretty much on the head yesterday too, is that Auburn seems to lack the downhill run game that they've had the last few years. Like they seem very perimeter oriented and like a little bit softer on offense. And I think that's going to be, and Stidham not being able to run is a big part of it. Like he's a pretty accurate passer, but I would, in my opinion, and this isn't me saying that, if Auburn were to somehow win out, they're going to make the playoff. But I think they're out of the playoff now because they have to go on the road to Starksville. They have to play at Bama and at Georgia. So they're losing one of those games at least. I think that Auburn has played themselves out of the playoff with that loss. I think that's how big that game was for them, in my opinion. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah, that's a really tough one to drop at home with all the tough road games they got left. They kind of had to, hold serve at home.
I agree. It's kind of the same thing. Same theory I had with LSU is good defense, but because their offense isn't as efficient as it has been.
Yeah.
Actually, really, I was kind of looking at this when I was watching the game. Like their offense last couple years just hasn't been as explosive as maybe 3-4 years ago when they were.
Yeah, I think
Nick Marshall.
Right.
I'm thinking about, and so they play good defense that keeps them in games. But when you run in, once again, like Alabama and Georgia, their offenses are so explosive. Like I don't know if you can score with them.
Yeah, I think that's the difference this year is Georgia and Alabama, like the SEC, which is normally very strong defense. I think it's probably consensus in the pod that we feel that Auburn's probably played themselves out of the playoff with that loss. And then LSU, time will tell, but I think we're not sold on them as an elite team, but I think a team that's certainly better than what we thought they were going to be. And I'm impressed with the play calling and how they're letting Burrow attack teams down the field, and we'll see if they're going to be able to do that against the two big boys in the conference coming up here later in the year. So let's move on to the other marquee game from last week, and there's a couple other games that we'll get into later, but while we have David from New Orleans on, we're going to go over the OSU TCU game, and certainly an entertaining game, to say the least, a track meet of sorts, I guess. Addison, if you want to go ahead with your main takeaways from the game, and then we'll kind of go in the same order we did before there.
Okay, it was definitely an interesting game. OSU with 2 defensive touchdowns and then a block punt that set up another touchdown. So they had a lot of points not from the offense basically, but they still moved the ball pretty well. They came up. They had to settle for a field goal when they got down to the 1 on the first possession, and then later towards the end of the first half, we had another drive where we
stalled
shanked
right
a
there.
field goal.
Yeah.
Looked really good, I thought. J.K. Dobbins had a good game. Joey Bosa, I keep calling him Joey.
I
now.
do too on the pod.
Nick Bosa looked his usual self until he left with a groin injury, so that's a pretty big question going forward since we need him to be healthy in 2 weeks at Penn State.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he's going to be, but we'll see.
Yeah, so the D. And then questionable behind that because our linebackers were non-existent for a lot of the game, I thought. And then, the secondary at times they just, they're in position, they just can't make a play, on the long touchdown throw that TCU had for their last touchdown of the game.
Yeah. David, if you want to give different, or I guess just add on to that.
I'll chime in a couple things. So I was really paying attention to Dwayne Haskins' throws last night.
Right.
And by my count, he only missed 2. That's how accurate he was.
Yeah.
One was he got pressured, he overthrew Terry McLaurin.
Yeah.
And the second was he underthrew Ben Victor on what should have been a
touchdown. Yeah, that was a big
one. Definitely a touchdown.
And then debatable the little goal line play to Rashad Berry. He puts not the 2-point conversion that he should have floated, but he puts a little more finesse on that one. That's probably a touchdown.
Yeah, the opening drive.
2.5. So 2.5.
Yeah.
So it's that he really missed. Other than that, it was drops.
Yeah. Austin Mack dropping 4 or 5 balls.
Yeah, I think as far as I dug into that game after it when I don't know, I guess I was pretty excited from the win, but I was definitely upset with a lack of discipline on defense. Again, the same thing we said after Oregon State, gap assignment by the linebackers who, as Addison alluded to, were a lot of times non-existent. I think these young linebackers, they are aggressive, they're athletic, and I think they're overrunning a lot of plays. And there's too much run action in the backfield that they're getting baited on. And then TCU was going the other way with the play a lot of times. That's what happened on that 93-yard touchdown run where there was action right. Linebackers flowed too hard that way. The run basically was I don't remember if it was exactly like a counter trade, but it came back left. And then besides the linebackers just not showing up, Isaiah Pryor took a horrible angle. That's what the safeties besides Jordan Fuller.
Hey, can I stop you there?
Yeah.
That's the thing that stuck out to me on that, and I actually think that's that's the biggest weakness in the defense right now is that safety position across Fuller, because the 93-yard play, you're right, Pryor took a horrible angle.
Right.
Or else maybe that's a 30-yard gain. And then a play later in the game, touchdown, Jocelyn Wynn provided no help over the top.
He was there, and he just misjudged the ball or something and let the TCU guy catch it.
Those two guys, still I guess kind of according to the depth chart, duking it out for that safety position. It's just not.
Yeah, and they can't seem to figure out which one of those guys they want to play.
But I'll tell you what I like. What I've really liked is Sean Wade in the secondary. So
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe some one safety, 4 corner look.
Yeah, and I think
Okuda maybe playing. I don't know, something like that.
I think they've considered playing Wade at safety, and I hope he does play more at corner too, because I've liked what I've seen from Sean Wade so far.
Yeah, Wade, I think he gave up one play, and it was, he was there, but he just didn't make a play on the ball. And I think overall, though, he's definitely one of the more talented guys in that group. I think that him and Okuda definitely need to be playing a little bit more. I was a little disappointed in Damon Arnett. I've thought he's been kind of overrated for 2 years now, and but they seem to tighten up a little bit going into the fourth quarter and throughout that quarter. And I thought OSU's depth is what kind of helped wear down TCU. We alluded to that in a lot of our preseason conference previews. Is that the big boys? The difference is that teams like TCU, those middle tier teams, they can hang with the big boys a lot of the time. But when you get to the end of the game, where depth matters a lot. If TCU loses their best defensive end, it's going to be tough for them to replace that kind of production. And I'm not saying you just replace Nick Bosa, or replace like Chase Young, but Cooper came in,
Yeah,
played well.
There was not a lot of drop-off when Bosa left.
And like, the defense even played better. I mean, I'm not saying obviously they'd be better with him, but you know what I'm saying though. So I think overall, I think it is. Next week Ohio State's going to beat Tulane, and we'll talk about. I guess as far as like
the Tolman Bowl.
Yeah, the Tolman. Yeah, exactly. So I mean, but as far as looking ahead to Week 5 when they go to Happy Valley, and that's going to be one of the bigger games of the year. Penn State's somewhat similar to TCU in the sense that they like to get on the perimeter, they like to take shots down the field. It's we'll see with Urban being back on the sidelines if that helps at all with adjustments. That's what he gets paid to do, and that's something that we didn't really mention in this game. But I think overall, OSU showed how explosive they can be, and you guys nailed it with Haskins, and that offense is going to be – it's only going to get better. They're going to be scary good. I'm not sure there's really a defense that's going to really – they're not going to be stopped. They might get slowed down a little bit at times. Like, we got to convert in the red zone, though. Like, when I say we, like, if I'm going more biased in this, Ohio State needs to convert in the red zone. That's how you beat elite teams. They can't be kicking field goals when they get to, like, the games that seriously matter. Like, not that the TCU game doesn't matter, but you guys know what I mean. Like, Big Ten championship or playoffs perhaps. But I do think that this could be a year where the defense needs to limit big plays. Maybe they give up some yards, but hold teams to field goal attempts, and then the offense will take care of the rest, I think. But I do think there needs to be better play from the linebackers, and then as Tolman and actually Addison and I have said for the last few weeks, like, you need better angles from the safeties. You need the secondary to step up. So I think moving forward, though, we'll see. But
it's just crazy the amount of big running plays we've given up so far this year.
Yeah.
Like, going back to the Oregon State game.
It's
last
unacceptable.
night.
It's embarrassing.
And that was the longest play we've given up in our history.
Well, and the thing that's annoying is when I dug into the stats, like, yards per play, TCU played us snap for snap. That's one thing that I want to mention is we're Ohio State fans on the pod. David from New Orleans is a New Orleans fan.
We got to mention TCU.
Fan, but TCU really impressed me. Like, their game plan was really, really well thought out. Gary Patterson's a great coach.
They came out. They wanted to wear us down.
And Sean
too.
Robinson played well. I thought he was going to suck, and I thought he made some pretty clutch throws. Some of them were set up for him to be successful, but that's what good coaches do.
Yeah.
And that brings
Sonny Cumbie, I think, is a good play caller.
Yeah.
They've got a lot of good skill guys. Their defense is really good, I think, for a Big 12 team especially.
Yeah. And talk about, like, coaches putting guys in a position to win. That's why I understand that coaches have their systems, and when Chris Ash left to become the coach at Rutgers, he played basically like it's basically like a quarters defense. Like, it's man coverage, but it's almost like a hybrid where the corners drop back with the safety. Yeah. It's almost like a zone. Schiano plays a little bit like tighter man, even though I felt like we weren't really on the last scrimmage last night. Like, there's a lot of quick throws that these guys had a lot of room. I don't understand why Ohio State doesn't actually go to a little bit more zone sometimes. Like, maybe let the pass rushers go. Let these DBs not be, like, in bad spots and man-to-man if they're going to play that poorly. So I'm not saying they need to go only zone, but I wonder if maybe they're going to start mixing in more of that to change it up and try to fix it.
We'll see.
I think they recruit guys that play man. They recruit guys that can play man-to-man.
Right.
That's their criteria. So
yeah, I do wonder with, like, the types of athletes they are, though. Like, I feel like they should be able to, like, switch that, but you are right. Like, they are recruited to fit a certain philosophy. So it is, it's like telling Boeheim, like, basketball players to all of a sudden start playing man defense. Like, they're not there to do that. So I get that. So yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so before I'm gonna go, but before I do, I got one question for you guys. I'll give you my answer when you're done. Okay. So most impressive team could be like most impressive or most surprising, and most disappointing team.
Of the week so far, or of the season so far?
Of the season so far.
Okay.
Most disappointing is 100%
Florida State.
Like, it's not even close.
We talked about that a lot this weekend.
I've never been a believer in Willie Taggart as a coach, so I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about Willie a little bit, and that was kind of a question mark coming into the year. And I think Addison and I might talk about them when you get off here. But most disappointing. I mean, maybe they aren't as talented as we thought they were, but they're not this bad. Like, Taggart's just not getting through to these guys. Like, they can't block a soul on offense. Like you and Addison and I could get to the quarterback against them.
But the thing is, they look like the same team as last year, which I thought was an anomaly, and it doesn't look like it.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, and I think Jimbo's a proven better coach, and he couldn't get them to play well. So I don't know.
There's something up with the guys they brought in. They just
maybe they lack leadership. Maybe those guys just weren't developed. Maybe they aren't as good as they thought. But FSU is 100% the most disappointing team. I really think they're going to struggle to win 3 games this year. So, what about most impressive? Then I guess.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of
besides
a surprise team besides Bama,
For me, it's Oklahoma.
Okay, yeah.
I have.
That's a good one. Yeah.
I've liked what I've seen from them. I know they haven't played in much good competition.
Yeah, because
they look good. They look good. They look physical. They look fast. Kyler Murray is a way better passer than I thought.
I agree. So, he's definitely filled in well.
Oklahoma, I'd say has jumped up in my mind as maybe the Big 12 can get based on the way TCU played and what I've seen from Oklahoma, they could get a team in the playoff.
Okay, yeah.
I did not think that at the start of the year. So.
Okay, yeah.
Another disappointing team I'd just throw in there. Not as much as Florida State, but I'd say Wisconsin. The first 2 games, they're playing shitty teams. They won easily, but I didn't think they looked that great in either game. And then yesterday, losing to BYU is pretty stunning. So, and going forward now, they've got a tough schedule at Iowa next week. There's a good chance they lose, and if they do, they're not getting to the Big Ten championship. Even if they win, they still have to go to Michigan and Penn State. I don't see them winning those games. So
okay, yeah. As far as I guess most impressive so far, it's Bama's an obvious one. That I also think. Louisville and
their offense is way more impressive than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, man, they're pretty scary good with that kind of offense in 2 there. I guess besides the obvious ones, you know what? I was going to talk about this game a little bit. So going to the other side of, I think it's the Bedlam rivalry. I actually was really impressed with Oklahoma State yesterday. They were very physical in their front 7 on defense. They physically beat down Boise State, and I thought Boise was going to go in there and physically handle them based on what I've seen. Now, Boise hadn't played anybody yet either, but I think I said this in the Big 12 preseason podcast that I thought Oklahoma State was going to go into Norman undefeated, and that was going to be a game that previewed the Big 12 championship because I have both those teams playing each other a second time this year. But I agree with you, Tolman. I think Oklahoma, based on how Kyler Murray's looked, they definitely look like they haven't missed a beat. Now, defensively, I thought they missed a lot of tackles and had trouble defending the pass against Iowa State, but that's kind of what they were last year too, and they almost pulled it off anyway. So, but I was pretty impressed with Oklahoma State. I'm actually curious to see what they look like moving forward. So I guess that would be an impressive one that's kind of off the cuff or whatever.
Yeah, and there was so much to replace there offensively, but
yeah.
Cool.
All right, man. Well, I guess if we, we'll be back on next week, and we'll see if we can get you back on. But we will talk to you later then.
Have a great week, guys.
All right, see you.
All right,
man.
see you.
Bye. All right, so always good to have David from New Orleans to get that LSU perspective, the OSU perspective, since he's lived in both places. He knows both fan bases. So, so I guess to move into our we'll give our winners and losers for the week real quick, I guess, and then get into our bets. But my loser for the week, just to kind of, I guess, a seamless transition from the most disappointing program this year, Florida State is the clear loser for me. The podcast unanimously bet Florida State, okay, between -2.5 and -4. And the way that we thought about that game was they're desperate. They need the win. Willie Taggart needs this win to get his team going for the rest of the year because we felt like if they lose this game, then they might not be able to come back this year from that. And I think we all kind of felt like they either were going to go in there and be like, you know what, we're going to get our shit together. We're going to beat down a program that we should beat down. Or we just thought they were going to get their ass kicked, and it was unfortunately the other way. Syracuse really handled them the whole game. Florida State can't block anybody offensively. Every play is slow developing 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage. The only thing I can say about Florida State that's good is I feel bad for these kids on defense because they ball out. They have a really good defense, but it doesn't matter when you
Yeah,
score.
I feel like at some point they're just going to stop giving a fuck too. If this
Seriously,
offense
yeah.
can't move the ball at all.
Yeah.
I talked to Cam Akers a lot in the preseason, and it sucks for him that his offensive line can't block anyone. So he basically, has nowhere to run.
Yeah.
Really good player, but his stats are probably going to suck this year.
Yeah.
Like you said, D is good, but yeah, this offense looks like they're not well coached. Like there's a lot of stupid mistakes, stupid penalties. They just look disorganized.
Yeah, bad management.
Yeah,
players not in the right position. Like as far as like being put in a position to win. Yeah. It's embarrassing.
For example, the end of the first half situation they were in, they were in field goal range, and they let the clock run out. They ran a play, I think, like in the middle of the field.
Yeah.
We're short of the first down, and they had no timeout, so the clock just ran out. Like things like that.
Yeah.
Are examples of, and the penalties are what I mean when I talk about, just disorganized and just look like they're not well coached.
Yeah, I think Willie Taggart, he seems like a good dude, and I alluded to this, I think, in last week's podcast that he, I believe, grew up in Florida. I believe this is the team he rooted for. This is his dream job. He seems like he wants the kids on his team to grow up to be like good young men, like all that stuff. Like he seems like a good guy, and so I wish this wasn't the case. But honestly, just from a pure football perspective, and the few games that I've watched Florida State play this year, they aren't well coached. I don't think he is ready for this kind of job. I think he had success at his other stops just because they were smaller stops. He wasn't dealing with the pressure. Maybe I don't know what it is exactly, but he just doesn't look like he's an elite football coach, to be totally honest. He might be better fit as like maybe a coordinator or a coach at a smaller school, but this isn't working out. And we're 3 games in. But the thing is, though, how much leash does this guy get? Because when I look at their schedule, like we have their schedule out right here, I could seriously make an argument for them to lose every remaining game.
Yeah.
They could seriously go 1-11.
You can definitely make that case. Like, so they play Northern Illinois this week. I wouldn't be surprised if they lose that game. They almost lost to Samford.
Yes. Yeah. They gave up almost like 500 yards to the air to Samford, I think. Now, Northern Illinois is a running team. They seem to be a little more stagnant on offense. Florida State might be able to duke out a 6-3 win, or they get a defensive touchdown win. But
it's going to be very defensive, probably.
The fact that we're even talking about Florida State and this scenario, like this is how they'd have to win. They could go 1-11. This is bad. Like Willie Taggart could get fired after this year.
Yeah,
that's how it goes.
Yeah, definitely. And what's funny is he really doesn't have much of a resume. Going in, like when he got this job,
he's pretty fine. He's fine.
Besides being at smaller schools, Western Kentucky and South Florida,
right?
He was at Oregon for just the 1 year, and they went 7-6.
Yeah, like he was really good when Herbert was healthy. When Herbert wasn't, they were trash.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think his calling card was he went to South Florida when they were terrible, and he each year got them to where like they were more relevant. Like we talked about this in the ACC preview, but I feel for the guy. I hope he gets. I do hope he gets another year to maybe prove people wrong. But honestly, guys, if they win 1 to 2 games, I think he's gonna get canned.
Yeah, he will.
Too much pressure there.
It's unacceptable at a school like Florida State to have that kind of season.
Yeah. So as far as did you have like a different loser for the week, or like anybody else that you thought kind of blew it? Or
I mentioned Wisconsin. Florida State was the big one though, and we had to talk about
when
that.
we get into Wisconsin, Iowa, which we're gonna preview probably in the next 10 to 15 minutes here. I was really surprised that I watched actually a good amount of that game, and BYU averaged like a full yard or yard and a half more per play, playing the same game that Wisconsin plays. Like it's shocking to me that BYU went into Camp Randall and played the same exact style of football and beat them down. Like, I mean, it was a close game, but BYU, when I dug deeper into the stats, they just were the better team, like by a decent margin yesterday. It was surprising. I think the biggest thing that's a surprise to us is that our podcast, for the most part, I don't think Corey necessarily agreed with this, but Steele and Addison and I during the Big Ten pod, we said, based on the fact that we thought Hornibrook was going to be more like improved this year, and the fact that Wisconsin was bringing back that offensive line, we assumed they'd be solid on defense, which they still seem to be.
Yeah.
We actually considered them a national title contender this year, albeit via the really tough schedule. However, Brian J. from Columbus, one of our pod affiliates, he kept telling me for the last few weeks, I'm telling you, Hornibrook's not going to be improved. He's not good.
Yeah.
And finally today, I was like, you know what? I can't argue with that. I just haven't seen the improvement.
No, he hasn't. I don't think he's good.
No.
I don't
He
is not good enough. Yeah, he is not good enough to beat elite defenses, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, and it's
what
teams
are
teams are going to attack that, and they're going to make it harder for Wisconsin to run. And that's what it seemed like kind of happened yesterday.
100%, yeah. I think this is. We'll get to the Iowa preview, but I think we're thinking Wisconsin's more like a 3-loss football team now.
Yeah.
So they're out of the playoff, in my opinion. Teams are. It's kind of weird this year. I saw a tweet from Chris Fowler last night that he said it almost feels like college football this year is Cavs versus Warriors, just based on how the top tier teams have basically separated themselves. There's teams that are starting to fall. That we were maybe they could be national title contenders, but it's week 3 now. Teams are kind of starting to show their true colors, like Auburn, Wisconsin. We're starting to lose some playoff contenders.
Yeah, what's funny about it is I think the last few years, what's weird is that the top teams have separated themselves even more.
Yeah.
And you thought the playoff would make things more interesting, more teams would have a shot at it.
Right.
But really, there's just a few schools that are kind of just getting into the playoff every year.
Yeah.
And it just comes down to them, like Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State to a lesser extent, and Oklahoma.
Right. Yeah, so I guess we'll transition to our winners, and then we'll go over some bets real quick. I'll keep it simple because we already talked about this, but Joey Burrow is my winner for the week. I was really impressed with I'm impressed with how he's handled 2 tough defensive units so far to play against, as far as Miami and Auburn. I like that they're allowing him to throw the ball down the field. Is this a little bit homerish of a pick? Yes, because he is a former Buckeye, but I was curious to see how he handled the transition. I mean, he hasn't ever practiced with those kids before he transferred late in the summer or whatever. He's playing big time SEC football now, and he looks the part. He looks smart. I like his guts. I like the moxie, as we like to talk about these quarterbacks. So he's my winner for the week, and I want to see what LSU looks like moving forward.
I'll go with Washington. I thought that going into Utah and winning the way they did was pretty impressive.
I watched
really
that game.
good defensive performance.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people were talking about this spot being one where Utah could surprise them.
Mm-hmm.
Utah usually plays them tough anyway, but Washington, if they keep playing that way, going through the Pac-12, they could get themselves back into the playoff talk.
Yeah, they like I said, I think when I dug more into the game, I thought my Auburn bet was good, but whatever. Auburn covered, but I think Washington actually outplayed.
Yeah,
Auburn.
Washington played.
We just said they should have scored.
Yeah, they played very well. Yeah, they were just awful in the red zone, and they left a lot of points on the field, and that was basically the difference in the game.
I mean, I think it's I think they're going to lose another game just because I think it's so hard to just win out from that point on.
Yeah, it's a lot easier said than done. Whoa, Giants just got the outside kick.
But I still
it's over.
Yeah, but I think it's reasonable to think that they could pull it off because they're definitely the best team.
Yeah, I want to look at what their schedule looks like.
But I think so there was some good performances yesterday, some winners you could certainly pick. I thought Dwayne Haskins played well. I thought the Bama. I'll give, as much as I hate Alabama, I try to be as objective as I can. I was really impressed with the fact that Alabama's defense, after that first long play they gave up against Ole Miss, held Ole Miss to 150 yards on 40 plays or something. Ole Miss, by all accounts, has a very explosive offense. So if Bama's defense is that good this early already, and we'll see. Ole Miss is trash. Louisville's trash.
Ole Miss's defense especially is trash.
Yeah, exactly. But
they gave up 38 points in the first half to Southern Illinois. So, and Alabama did beat them 66-3 last year too. So I mean, it was pretty much the same game as last year.
Yeah, and when we get into the Bama A&M preview, I think this is going to be the first week this year that we're going to see if Bama smokes them, then maybe maybe we're just going to be waiting for the Georgia showdown after that. But
and the thing is, Alabama's schedule, like they've got a pretty favorable schedule
with super favorable.
Georgia. They get Auburn at home.
Yeah. But anyway, so speaking of Washington's schedule, I guess, were you going to touch base on that?
I was just looking at it.
Yeah.
Next week they play Arizona State. Then they got BYU, which I guess is kind of interesting now.
Yeah, but that's a decent matchup now, perhaps. Yeah, BYU a little bit better than we thought. Maybe, and like we said, maybe Wisconsin's worse than we thought they were going to be, but maybe BYU is better than we thought. Could be a combination of both those things. So, before we move into these game previews real quick, I guess we'll give, as always, a few of our better bets for the last week, a few of our worst bets. Right away, I'm going to get into a bet that wasn't necessarily, I think, a bad bet, but one of the worst beats that this podcast has taken. Three of us had the Bama Ole Miss over at 71, and this game was at 56 points at halftime, I think. Like, it was, Bama had like close to 50 at halftime, and this game finished at 69. There was only 13 second half points. Ole Miss didn't score a point after that first drive, so that was pretty brutal. I think we were all a little salty after that. But I guess I'll just get into mine real quick. I guess one of my better bets was Troy. I had them plus 11.5 at Nebraska. They won outright. I had a feeling that Nebraska was going to sit their freshman quarterback Martinez with the Michigan game coming up. I felt that Nebraska wasn't going to be as good as people thought, even with all the Scott Frost love. I thought that was going to take 2 to 3 years. And Troy is one of those teams recently that they go to tough Power 5 opponents, their homes, and they beat them. They beat LSU. They cover, and that's all that matters. But if they're going to beat them, that's even better. So
and Martinez being out for Nebraska is another good reason to take, or was another good reason to take Troy there. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then I said one of my most confident bets of last week was Army against Hawaii. They kind of dipped around with that game at the end, but I figured Hawaii with a 6 a.m. kickoff essentially on the East Coast at noon. I thought that Army would be able to handle that game, and they did. Like I said, they dicked around, but they covered. They won by 7. I had it at 6. One of my worst bets, I already gave the FSU as the one that the podcast basically missed. I had Boise State plus 2, and I actually had more money on the money line. It was a misread on that game. Oklahoma State was much more tenacious up front, and I actually alluded to the fact that I thought Oklahoma State, their D-line was one of their strengths, but I didn't think they were going to be that physical and that tough. They held Boise to I don't remember, it was a very small amount of yards rushed. I think it was 1.1 yards on the ground or something like that. Very surprising for a Big 12 team. So that Boise bet was pretty horrible. If you want to go ahead with your bets, and then we'll get into the other two after that.
Best bet by far, Florida State Cuse under 68.
Oh, yeah. That's pretty good.
Considering Florida State can't score, this thing never got close. The final, for 3 quarters, I mean, for a while it was 6-3.
Yeah.
Cuse actually blew them out at the end, got some touchdowns, and then Florida State finally got on the board with a late touchdown. The final was 30-7, so they only got halfway there pretty much. And Florida State going forward is going to be really interesting to see what their totals are at, because they look like they could end up being an under machine.
Yeah.
With
sure.
If their defense still keeps playing well, but their offense keeps playing like trash.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Yeah.
Also had LSU plus 10, and obviously got the straight up win there.
Yeah. Nice one.
Yeah, I thought that one was going to be low scoring defensive. So, in that kind of game, getting double digit points, of course, I'm going to take that. Worst bet, I'd say Washington, Utah. I said over 47. Last year I took a lot of Washington unders, being a defensive team last year, and that's carried over to this year too.
Yeah.
The reason I went over, though, the matchups the last 3 years have actually been higher scoring than you would expect. I didn't know if there's something there that for some reason this matchup they tend to be higher scoring than the rest of their games, but that was not the case last night, and final was 21-7, so that one didn't really get close at all.
Okay, yeah. I'll give one each for Corey and Steele since they're not going to be on the pod tonight. Corey, good bet for the week. Pitt plus 3.5 versus Georgia Tech. I think they actually smoked them pretty good
Yeah, Georgia Tech made it close at the end, but Pitt kind of controlled the game.
Right, and I think Corey took advantage of the fact that he knew of like some injuries for Georgia Tech, and I think he got Pitt as like an overreaction to the Penn State game. Like it was a sloppy, wet game. Franklin just poured it on at the end. Certainly, I'm not trying to defend Pitt or anything. Like they played poorly in that game.
I think that loss to Penn State probably 51-6 final like. That was in a lot of people's minds, but I think there were a lot of turnovers and things that kind of just made that score balloon at the end.
Yeah, for sure. So he definitely hit on that one. I would say, I guess his like worst bet, he had UCLA -1 versus Fresno. That line moved to where Fresno was like -3 at kickoff, and then Fresno ended up beating them down. UCLA, we said in the Pac-12 pod, like it's gonna take time with Chip Kelly. This team's bad. Like they suck. So I don't know who's like honestly. If UCLA played Florida State, there's a chance Florida State could win. But
the fact that Wilton Spate started the year in Chip Kelly's offense is pretty funny.
It's pretty bad.
Even though he's hurt now, he's not playing. But
and then Steele, his best bet I would say was he was on the opposite side of the Boise Oklahoma State. He took Oklahoma State -3 when it seemed like the world was taking Boise. And even though he got like the worst of it as far as the line, he could have gotten Oklahoma State as a dog at kickoff.
Yeah.
But he seemed pretty confident in them, and rightfully so. They kicked ass, so that was a good bet. I mean, I would say his worst bet was Tennessee, just for putting faith in them, for being able to cover a bet. We talked about this week 1. Tennessee, you shouldn't bet them. He had Tennessee -29.5 against UTEP. They had a chance at the end of the game to cover, but I believe they only won 24-0.
I don't think there were a lot of points in the second half of that one.
So that was probably his miss. I think the podcast overall last week didn't have the greatest week, and I think we're still hovering a little bit over 500. It's a little bit of a slow start this year.
I'm a game below 500. It's like I can't get a winning streak. It's like I win one, lose one, just going back and forth. I like that we're getting into conference play now, though.
Yeah, I expect us to progress towards the mean, for ourselves. Like the pod was like 56% last year, and I think we're a little bit over 500, like I said, so we're a little bit below pace.
The thing is, I haven't had really, like you said, we're just around 500, so it hasn't been awful. We're in a spot where, if you have just like one good week, all of a sudden you're doing well.
Yeah.
And with a few weeks under our belts, hopefully more information,
like Steele and I
kind of lock into our picks.
Yeah, Steele and I talked about this in the last pod. Like, it doesn't make it easier, but information's everything, and maybe we come up with like trends, or we just feel more confident. And I expect us to do better going through the conference part of the year. So, getting into now the week 4 marquee games, then we'll give some bets or maybe some lines that we're just kind of looking at the end. And then, like I said, I'll add bets towards the end here because I think we generally like to keep the pod about an hour or less each week, so we're at like 40 minutes or now. So, but let's get into. We'll start kind of progressing with like the kickoff time. So, as we talked about with Bama, they haven't really played anybody that's given them any kind of competition yet. And this week, even though the game is at home, I expect them to win. They get Texas A&M at home, and Texas A&M, they've blown out 2 very inferior opponents, as they should, and then they played Clemson very well. Like, when I dug into that game, A&M, I believe, actually gained more yards per play than Clemson did in that game, and they averaged almost 7 yards per play. And now,
and they threw for a ton of yards, too.
Most of it was through the air. They struggled on the ground running. I think a lot of teams are going to struggle against Clemson's defensive line in the front 7, but if Clemson maybe had like a weakness this year, it was similar to Ohio State. We thought it could potentially be the secondary, like in the passing game. But if Bama has had any kind of weakness at all in like their, the greatest program ever, then it has been like in the secondary as far as like they have a tendency to maybe give up some big plays in the passing game. So.
And I wanted to see how they did this past week, against Ole Miss, and they had no trouble.
They had no trouble, so that's something to keep in mind. But I think A&M will present a little bit stiffer competition. I think Jimbo is pretty decent in big games, it seems like. A&M's getting 24.5 points right now.
Yeah, that's a lot.
How do we feel that line's like pretty accurate? I mean, is Bama that good right now that we feel like that's an accurate line and they should win the game by 3+ touchdowns?
Just my initial thought is that it's too many, but I'll have to obviously have to think about it some more.
Yeah.
It's just interesting that we get this kind of comparison, see how Alabama looks against a team that, played Clemson really tough.
Right, yeah.
So,
and that game was at home for A&M, but still.
Was at home, and then this one's away. Yeah,
right.
Definitely matters. They've gone to Alabama a few times in recent years and got absolutely smoked. So
yeah,
they played well in College Station against them, not so much on the road.
So yeah, I guess on the surface, I would say probably too many points. But here's the thing: this year we keep saying that Bama's not usually a team that covers big spreads. It's an SEC game.
Yeah, I think that applies more to the out-of-conference games where they just they took their foot off the gas against those.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think that Bama's a little bit different with Tua in there. And I'm not sure how much Jalen Hurts is going to play in this game. He played a lot in the last game because they were killing Ole Miss. But when Tua's in there, he's putting the ball and the money down the field. They're very explosive. So I don't know. It might be one I have to dig in a little bit closer. But I think on the surface, we probably just right now, if we have to pick, we would probably take those points and choose A&M in this game and say they keep it within 24. But I think the key to the game is I think clearly A&M's ability to be able to at least contain Alabama on offense, at least keep the game somewhat close to where they have belief that they can win the game, in the second half. I think you don't want Bama to get off to you don't want any team to get off to a fast start, but that's not a team that you want to try to come back on, essentially.
Yeah, and I want to see more from Kellen Mond, the quarterback from A&M. He had an amazing game against Clemson, and then, if he can do something like that, he doesn't even have to get close to that. If he has a solid game against Bama, then
Yeah, and if they find any kind of balance as far as being able to run the ball at all, then that would be big for them too.
Yeah.
But I expect Bama to comfortably win the game. I just think 24.5 is a lot of points against a team that's not a dog shit team, essentially. So,
yeah, last year they let A&M hang around and kind of make it interesting at the end.
Yeah,
but
it was one of their maybe tougher games for the most part.
They ended up only winning by 8 for the final. It was kind of they kind of had the game in hand, but they just they let them hang around a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't know. I guess we feel like Bama's going to comfortably win that game, but we think A&M could put up a fight, and potentially it could be a bet to look into. We have to dig a little bit deeper, but let's move into Pac-12 matchup, and this is going to be ABC's marquee game, Stanford and Oregon. It's interesting because Oregon, Addison was saying before the pod, they haven't really played a real football game yet.
You can't really take away anything from their games so far. They played Bowling Green, Portland State, and San Jose State. Those are all Bowling Green and San Jose State are really bad FBS teams. I don't know anything about Portland State, but they're an FCS team.
They're trash.
Yeah, this is basically a bunch of bye weeks so far, and now they finally get a real game, and it's against one of the Pac-12 contenders in Stanford. It is at Oregon, where it's always tough to play there, and I don't know.
I think I read the last 6 games. Yeah, I think maybe it is in Eugene, or it might just be overall. Stanford seems to do pretty well against Oregon, against the spread.
They do better than most teams playing there.
Yeah, I think though. I think Stanford, and we talked about this a little bit before we came on the pod. I think Stanford's a little overrated right now. I dug a little bit into their game against San Diego State, and then who was their second opponent? There was another game that they played where I felt like they
USC.
Yeah, that game. I don't feel like they were as dominant in that game as the score.
Also,
indicates.
in USC coming off a big loss to Texas, that doesn't look like.
Yeah.
I said that USC would be better at the end of the year, and they were kind of a question mark at the start, having a true freshman quarterback in there.
I think it's, I guess to get into USC just really quick, just because it is a common opponent, we all picked USC to be I picked them to be the Pac-12 champion. So did you, so did Steele, I believe. And that's not looking too good right now because I think we had more faith in just the overall talent on the roster. But what we underestimated, which we already knew, is how shitty of a coach Clay Helton is.
We always say that.
I saw his record. I think his record against it's ranked teams. He's 1-10 without Sam Darnold. When Darnold's in there, this NFL talent that maybe you can overcome coaching woes, but man, Clay Helton, he's USC is going to be pretty bad this year, I think.
Yeah.
Like, I don't see any reason to think that they're going to improve all of a sudden. This is going to be tough sledding for them. But Stanford, the point is I think Stanford, their score looked pretty good against like competent opponents, or like maybe a blue blood program in name. And then San Diego State, who just came off like a pretty good win against Herm, who that's a bet that we missed that we talked about.
Yeah.
San Diego State was a perfect spot to take them as a dog, just outright against Arizona State. They won the game outright. But as Addison said, this game's hard for us to, I guess, kind of pick apart because we don't really know exactly what Oregon is right now. It is a tougher place to play. Herbert's a pretty good quarterback. I guess, I don't know. I guess I could flip a coin. I think I would just take the home team with any kind of points.
Yeah, and it opened, I think Oregon was -1, and I've seen it go to Oregon now is +1 already. So
yeah, and I guess I'll give really quick like my reasons for why. I guess I can't just say Stanford's overrated and not give a reason why. Stanford is what I thought they would be, basically the same that they've been the last few years. They're really inefficient on offense. They either hit like an explosive play or they don't, and it's much easier for them to do that against like basically worse competition. I don't know how healthy Bryce Love is. He didn't play yesterday. That doesn't mean a ton to me. They didn't need him to win yesterday, and they knew that. But I don't trust how inefficient they are. I do think that David Shaw is a really good coach, but I don't personally think Stanford is a top 10 team like their ranking indicates. I think they're more like a 20 to 25 team, and I think Oregon's potentially like around 25. So I do think that the line is pretty accurate, and I think it might be like a no-bet situation just because we just don't know enough about Oregon.
Yeah. I don't really know much about Oregon.
But if like I said, we do the podcast. If we had to choose, I'm going to take Oregon at home and just flip the coin.
I would be the same way.
Okay,
if I had to.
Let's get into a game that we actually know a little bit more about these teams. And just coming off disappointing loss, Wisconsin is going to Iowa. They're going to be playing that game at 8 o'clock. I believe it's on Fox. A game that we said in the Big Ten preseason podcast preview that we felt like this was going to be a pretty big game as far as deciding this division potentially. I actually, in the beginning of the year, said that Iowa was going to win this game and lead to them winning this division. Before this season began, I thought it was possible that we got to week 4 and I was like, you know what? I just feel like Wisconsin just looks too good. I think they're actually going to win this game now. I feel stronger about Iowa now.
Yeah.
Wisconsin, and it's a combination of two things. Wisconsin has started slow against Western Kentucky and New Mexico. They ended up turning it on towards the end of the game, but Hornibrook didn't look that good. They didn't look as dominant on the lines as I thought they would. And then BYU beat them at their own game, which I was going to play the same type of game.
All 3 of their games, they've started slow.
Yeah.
And then it really hurt them against BYU.
Yeah, and that's something that you can't do in Kinnick. Iowa's been very good against like top or ranked opponents essentially in Kinnick.
Yeah, especially at night.
At night as an underdog. That's their MO.
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't expect anything to change. I think it's going to be a tight game just because of the style of play. I can't see Iowa ever like pulling away from them unless they had defensive or special teams touchdowns. But Iowa, when I dug into their games, I was really impressed with how they stifled Iowa State's offense. It was Iowa State's first game because they had a game canceled, but how, Iowa State looked pretty good against Oklahoma. Maybe they did improve that much from one week to the other, but Iowa against a decent Northern Illinois program held them down, ended up winning that game 33-7. Then they beat Iowa State 13-3. Nothing fancy on offense. It's the same old shit with Iowa, like ball control, play action, play tough defense, but Iowa's front sevens brought it these first 3 games, and they played Northern Iowa yesterday. They're trash, like they killed them. But I think Iowa's going to win this football game. I think they're going to win it outright and take control of this division. How do you see this game going? Do you think Wisconsin bounces back?
I'm with you on Iowa. I would definitely. They're +3. I would definitely take the points. I think they're going to win straight up too. Iowa. I thought this game was going to be like that one big game that they get up for, like, because they always seem to do that every year.
Right.
2 years ago, knocked off undefeated Michigan. Last year, they almost beat Penn State, lost on the last play. Then they beat Ohio State, obviously. This is just that game where it's like, first game of the Big Ten season, but it feels like it's like the division title.
Everything's on the line here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like it's a huge game.
And it just seems like people are kind of catching on to Wisconsin. Like, I was surprised that they weren't able to run the ball better yesterday, even with that elite O-line that they've got. So I just think that they're too predictable.
Yeah.
And Iowa's defense has played really well, and I think they'll be able to it's obviously probably going to be a low-scoring defensive game. That's kind of how.
Could be a game to look at the total. Like, I think the games that you feel are like obvious overs or unders, like, you have to be careful with those. But this could be one where you're like, if it's around 44 to 46, that could be something you look into. But if you feel confident that Iowa could just win the game, then why not just take the points at home with the team that could win? So I think you made good points about Wisconsin looked really predictable against BYU. I was surprised that BYU just manhandled them essentially on the line. Like, Wisconsin was able to run the ball a little bit, but that is what their offense is. Like, I don't think they're ever going to be completely shut down in the run game, but it just hasn't been as efficient, as explosive. The main thing is when they need Hornibrook to make plays, he doesn't. And I think Iowa is going to sell out on the run. They're going to say, beat us, Hornibrook. He's not going to be able to. I give the quarterback edge actually to Stanley for Iowa, and I think they just make one or two extra plays at home. And I think the magic continues at Kinnick. So I think that's pretty much it. Like, there might be some other, like, decent kind of like mid-tier matchups, but this slate didn't look quite as strong. I think Addison actually was saying that Friday night is actually, for you guys, a little treat. There's potentially a few games that are worth watching.
Yeah, we got Florida Atlantic at UCF. So it's interesting. We always like Lane.
Yeah, and, could be one to look at a total, or perhaps I would assume that Lane's getting points, and that could be.
Oh yeah, he's getting 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, could be something to look at.
Yeah, UCF still got that winning streak going.
Yeah.
Penn State at Illinois. This probably won't be a great game, but I do want to see how Penn State looks. 1 week before they play Ohio State.
Right.
They are laying 27 against Illinois. Illinois, I think, is still not a good team, but they're improved over last year.
Yeah.
That's not saying much, but I think 27 is a lot to be.
They didn't look that terrible against South Florida yesterday.
Yeah.
Was like a 10-point favorite, 12-point favorite.
Yeah, they led throughout the game and then lost it right at the end.
Yeah.
So, I definitely think that they actually have a pulse, I guess, maybe. And Penn State, with Ohio State on deck, if they get a big lead in this game, they're not going to really
show much.
Exactly. They're not going to show much. They're going to take their foot off the gas. So it's like, a situation where Illinois can, if they are down a lot, they could backdoor it even. So
I think adding to that point real quick before you bring up the third game, I think Illinois, so this is like the classic spot for like you guys who don't do a lot of betting or you'd be looking to get into that. So when you look at like these spreads and you just think to yourself like, well, Penn State's really explosive, they should just blow Illinois out. Penn State does have Ohio State coming up the next week, as Addison alluded to. They're probably not going to want to show as much in the Illinois game. This is a big game for Illinois at home. It is a possibly like kind of like one of what we call a trap spot. Now, on the other side of that, Penn State matchup in Week 5, Ohio State. As an Ohio State fan, and I'm sitting here looking at how explosive the offense is, like their spread against Tulane right now is like 35.5. Honestly, like objectively, I would take Tulane, and these are the reasons why. Ohio State just came off an emotional win against TCU. They have Penn State coming up, and they possibly are without one or more of like their key players in this game.
Another thing,
Tulane's triple option.
Yeah, and Urban's first game back, everyone's like, "Oh, Urban's back. He's gonna win a murder him." We're not gonna show much against Tulane people. He's not gonna try and just like bury Tulane for no reason.
I don't think this is one of the main points, but like maybe those kids get finally asked a lot of questions about all that. There could be some distractions, but I think the main point is that OSU emotional win. They have to play Penn State the next week, so Tulane's that sandwich game. Tulane's a triple option team. Ohio State's not been very disciplined with the linebacking play and the secondary on defense. To stop triple option, you have to play disciplined football. And Ohio State hasn't quite proven that consistently enough to make me think that I feel like it's a spot where they're not going to show as much. Tulane might have the ball a little bit more than the average fan would think. I think it's a spot that you could consider Illinois and or Tulane.
You offense like Tulane's, you want to.
Now,
you kind of need to spend a little more time on it than we probably
right
have, so.
Now. If you make the bet, I think it's those are traditional spots where you pick the team the dog in a trap game, or a trap game or whatever. But would I be shocked if Penn State and Ohio State blew these two teams out? No,
of course
because they have explosive offenses and they have superior talent. It's just two spots where maybe they don't keep the gas pedal down quite as much as they would. So that's all we're saying. But that third game for Friday, real quick, I think it was
it's
the Pirate, right?
Pirate at USCe, yeah.
So
USCe trying to avoid going 1-3.
Yeah, you might actually get a decent game just because USC might be a little desperate. Washington State, it's a game that they should be up for, as it is a blue blood program that they're trying to beat. Make their footprint a little bit bigger in the Pac-12. So,
and the Pirate, coming in to this year, they were.
Did you see what the line was in that game by chance?
Yeah, USC -4.5.
-4.5.
Minus.
I might have to take the Pirate.
Yeah,
I'm
and that's your 10:30 game. So you got games all night.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we're at about an hour. I think we covered. We recapped all the week 3 stuff. We previewed week 4. We gave out some winners and losers. So as always, check, as I said, the video description for bets this upcoming week. I think the podcast overall is going to start progressing towards the mean, like we said, once we start getting to some of this conference play coming up. But anything you wanted to add before we wrap it up? And
just looking forward to conference play. I think the out of conference slate throughout the country wasn't as great as it has been.
Yeah.
So now looking forward to seeing some better games,
Yeah, I think you're going to start seeing some. It's the conference games. It's where these teams know more about each other. It's where these games matter more to these teams. They just do. So, I guess until next week, see ya.
Bye.